On Capitol Hill, I noticed. I mean, you probably expected the Democrats to be about as hostile as they were. Were you surprised by how much the Republicans sort of sounded like the lefties of old, butting in and say, "Hey, wait a minute, are you asking him to reveal his sources?" I mean, that happened a couple times, as I recall. But then also, were you surprised at the lack of interest in your work itself? Because just like they use the PR for the world's richest man smear online, they seem to employ a similar tact here where it was all guilt by association. Is, hey, did you get paid for this? Or, they talked about Elon as well. What were your reactions to those two things? A, how the Republicans handled themselves, and B, the fact that the Democrats, you probably expected some hostility, but I would imagine you might have expected them to engage more with the work itself rather than resort to the tactics they did.
I expected the attacks to be more sophisticated.
Right.
For those who are familiar with my work, there's stuff to go through if they wanted to. Like if they wanted to go back in the exile and do a little research, they could have made for a very rough hearing for me. But I know how I've covered Congress long enough to know basically how these hearings operate. The members don't really do any work themselves. Most of their aides actually don't do the work themselves. It's usually a couple of committee staffers who put together cheat sheets for each one of the members individually. So the quality of the attacks really depends on who's sitting in that minority office and how much time they've decided to allot to that hearing versus another hearing. I was surprised that they didn't put up, first of all, they didn't put up another witness, which would have significantly improved the situation for them, because the way it looked persecutorial. That situation with just Michael and me sitting there being insulted repeatedly while we sat there open mouthed. It was very bad video. Like the strategy of not having somebody sit there to speak on their behalf, I think was odd. Right. But they didn't. The fact that they didn't want to go anywhere with the material itself. I mean, I guess I wasn't surprised, but I'm just disappointed. Like you'd think there'd be one Dennis Kucinich in the committee, right? Who's actually interested, and there is an interesting conversation to be had about this stuff. These issues aren't easy. The internet's insane. There has to be some kind of thing that we decide upon to make it more make it a better experience for people and make it more socially beneficial, I guess, without having to resort to this top-down authoritarian system. That's something that has to be talked about. Why not just do that? Like, it seems like that would play so much better on TV from their point of view. Like, even if they didn't want to agree with what we were saying, they could have said, well, what about this? What about that? What's your solution to this? If you don't have one, aren't you just complaining? Like, they could have done a million things other than just attack our character and imply that we're being paid off. I mean, like, it's just so amateurish, the whole thing. I was a little shocked by that.
Yeah, and who they got to head that? What was her name? Plaskett? I never heard of it. It was like
Plaskett,
a non-voting delegate from some occupied territory somewhere. Like, all of a sudden she's here. She's running it. And then, you go to answer a question and, Washington Soldier, reclaiming my time. I'm like, are you here to get information from Matt and Michael, or are you here to grandstand? It just seemed to be, a big, opportunity for them to get their digs in for the cameras so that, some of our peers in our space can put out videos saying how much she owned you. I mean, that's what it seemed like it was. Yeah.
Well, look, they're learning the mechanics of YouTube. Have reached into Congress. It's kind of amazing to watch, actually. Even 4 or 5 years ago, the members had no idea what the YouTube was, and they didn't understand how important it was. And now, as you see from that hearing, they don't even bother trying to put together a coherent presentation about anything, because they're looking for are 30-second pieces of video that they know that somebody else will put up for them, and and that's really it. Like there's no discussion, there's no legislating that goes on, there's no deal making. I mean, they're just performers in a reality show that they don't get paid for. It's kind of amazing.
Well, that's what struck me watching it. It was very bizarre watching Jim Jordan sound like Abby Hoffman. You know, he's raising all the civil liberty issues, all the protection of the press issues. I said, if you time traveled someone from 1975 and made them watch this, and you asked them who was who, they would think the Republicans were the Democrats, and they would assume the Democrats were Republicans, which I think makes it very hard for people on the left today to know who to align with.
Of course, and your immediate reaction to that is to distrust the motives of the Republicans for suddenly becoming champions of free speech,
right,
when they were exactly the opposite 15 years ago, and that's totally legitimate. I understand that, but you know, some of those members, you know, like Jim Jordan was a friend with some former liberal Congress members that I know. You know, like there was a thing once where there was some collegiality among the members. They might have played at being enemies in public, but you know, behind the scenes they got along well. Like that's how the Audit the Fed bill happened, right? Because Ron Paul and Bernie, while they have completely opposite worldviews, they do get together. They were able to see the light on certain things, and I think, you know, the First Amendment is one of the things that members used to be able to agree on relatively. And also, it's also true, and this is a tough pill for Democrats to swallow, but you know, the party that represents you know, the less affluent voters tends to be more aggressively in favor of free speech. Like those voters tend to cling to those rights a little bit more because that's all they've got, you know. I mean, it's not all they've got, but that's one of the things that they have. And you know, the Trump voter was exercising their right to say "fuck you" by voting, right? Like that was part of what they were doing. You know, the Democratic Party has become an affluent party in the last 16 years. You know, I think it's 41 of the 50 richest districts have Democrats you know, in office now, and I think that's part of your explanation right there.
Well, I mean, I've floated this theory before. I would love to get your take on this. I think one of the reasons why the Republicans tend to be more in favor of free speech now than the Democrats is because the Republicans actually have a political ideology. They actually have a point of view. They have a worldview. You mentioned Bernie and Ron Paul. Like, they have worldviews. Democrats don't have a worldview now. They are just a middle management party of status quo maintenance. And so if you don't have an actual point of view, then what do you need a First Amendment for? In fact, the First Amendment kind of gets in your way at that point, does it not? Because with a political ideology comes confidence in your ability to defend that point of view. So therefore, the First Amendment doesn't scare you because, all right, I'll have an argument with somebody, I'll win it, and that'll be that. I don't think Democrats have that same confidence in their point of view because, as we've seen in these first 2 years of Joe Biden, they stand for nothing. They couldn't even get paid family leave through the House.
Yeah. Right. And they easily could have, by the way.
Of course. I'm sorry. Yeah, they got it through the House. Couldn't get it through the Senate.
Right. Yeah. But they're the managerial class, right? Like that's what they stand for is technocracy, right? And this whole thing that you know, the Clintons really made this popular in the 90s, this idea that you know, ideology is less important than just managerial competence, and that's what we stand for. And you know, we have an ability to work with the experts, right? The people who really know how to do things. And you know, Bob Rubin, we're gonna bring him in to become Treasury Secretary because yes, he's an evil scumlord who ran Goldman Sachs, but he really knows money, you know, and you know, who cares if he's not exactly the friend of the working man? Like that's not what the Democratic Party is anymore, right? I think that's just who they've become. They've become. It's funny because when I lived in Russia, there was this group of people that the Clintons kind of helped install in the Kremlin, who were nicknamed in Russia the energetic young reformers, and they described themselves as technocrats, and they had no ideology. They were just sort of deal makers who vaguely represented democracy and not communism. But there was no there, right? And I think Democrats have become those people. I think you're right.
Please clap.